Hi, and welcome to Traumaplicity. My name is Dr. Amanda Helman, and we look at trauma plus simplicity, meaning that we take simple steps in the healing of trauma rather than think about it in a complex way. We help our brain to really realize that we can do things one simple step at a time. I'm so excited that you're here. We have Traumaplicity Talk, the Traumaplicity podcast every week, and really our talk shows on the Facebook page. So every week at 7 p.m. And this week is sustained attention and the impact that happens with trauma. So when we have a trauma, so acute trauma is one trauma, or if we have more traumas that happen over time to lead to complex trauma, that will impact our brain. And what happens is all three parts of our brain, sometimes people call them four, I call it the triune brain because that makes a lot of sense to me. And we have our prefrontal cortex, which is our reasoning brain, our limbic system, which is our relationships, belonging, acceptance, and then we have our brainstem, which all to do with our safety responses. So are we going to have fight, flight? Do we feel safe? And when it comes to sustained attention, when we've had traumas that shock the body, really our central nervous system, what happens is we may be anxious or we may end up getting very stressed. And typically it impacts our sleep, our REM cycle, and usually our REM cycle is a way for us to actually heal during trauma. And if that gets impacted, then we're actually not sleeping as well. And that impacts our ability in any parts of our thinking. So sustained attention is a part of executive functioning skills. We have many executive functioning skills, and think of executive functioning skills as skills that we need that work together to help our brain think in different ways, to problem solve, to be aware, to help us to really plan or be organized, and to really to live life in a healthy way. And all of us have strengths and areas of growth in the area of really all of them. And sometimes we have higher skills like metacognition, which I almost just said. And metacognition is thinking about your thinking. And so when we're looking at sustained attention, that's our ability to keep our mind on something and focused. It's the start and stop of it, the duration. So for example, if I'm starting to write a journal entry at 12 o'clock, how long do I write and keep focused on my journal entry? Perhaps I'm talking about my weekend, or I'm writing a story, or I'm processing something. How long do I keep my attention just on that task and then stop? So let's say for one student, he's had different traumas, could be physical, emotional abuse. And so he starts it, but all of a sudden he has different thoughts or there's different attention things. And a lot of times attention deficit hyperactivity disorder is often misdiagnosed because it's usually trauma. And so what happens is you have all of these issues with attention. So to keep our attention span on something and begin from the beginning to the end, and that gets impacted. So we have this impact on our brain and our attention. And so that's one example of sustained attention and how that can be impacted. Because trauma from the womb all the way through our life, we actually can be impacted in hyperactivity. And that's proven because there's been science studies and research studies on cortisol in the body. And what happens, and it's not anything to do with mom, like we don't know what we don't know till studies, that if mom's more anxious, or there's different things going on that results in more anxiety, that cortisol shakeup can actually be impacted and passed down to the child from the womb. And again, that could also be generational trauma that happens and the child has that higher anxiety already in the womb. And that, again, sustained attention may impact the child even from that young, or things that if it happens later in life or different events, that can also impact a child. And so, yes, there are strategies to help us. That's the positive. So with sustained attention, it can impact our brain development as early on for our children and later on for our children. And so whether it's a now or later, we can be impacted. We can have things happen later in life that might impact our sustained attention. And just think about it. If you've had a traumatic event, trauma, memory, or thinking about it or anything, it impacts our ability to even concentrate or feel safe. So that's our brainstem, or feeling even connected. We may have a disconnect because it was such an intense, a horrible thing that happened that we can't even want to remember, or our brain's like trying to process it. And think for kids, that's really hard because they're so young that it's hard for them to have language for what happened. And so sustained attention can be impacted. So maybe Johnny and Susie are both writing a journal article or writing even in their journal, but if Susie had trauma, maybe before she was writing 20 minutes and now it's 5, or Susie had trauma early on, so now all of a sudden she's writing 5 minutes or maybe less if there's additional traumas. So just know that with that impacts. And also with sustained attention, it all just depends, because nowadays we have so many things that are so quick that it's almost like, okay, I have to do something for a long period of time, and that can be really tricky for some people. Or some people think they have really strong sustained attention, but what it is a trauma response. What do you mean, Amanda? Well, what that means is that sometimes, and I've heard even some fellow colleagues, that they will write all day and they have to stay focused on that, but that's how they can get things done. Otherwise, if they're not hypervigilant, they won't focus. And a lot of that was from trauma before. So they really have to focus hard. But that's not the typical way. We might have certain things where we're sustaining our attention on, whether we're doing a task or a presentation. Now, sometimes we have breaks and sometimes our mind may wander. We know that, we're humans, but sustained attention is interesting. And perhaps depending on the career or the field that you're in, it may be a good idea to figure out how long do you keep your attention on tasks. And it is interesting because some tasks that I have done, I can get things done quicker in a shorter amount of time, because I just don't work in that perfection now. I still want to do a good job, but it's not, excellence is just being excellent in who you are. And so anyway, that's some of the big things with sustained attention. So we can have trauma, can impact how we think, how we're processing, how we even are viewing things. When we have a trauma lens, which is basically a trauma response, because there's triggers to past traumas, past experiences that were painful, we may then really have a hard time concentrating because we have this emotional pain, physical pain, or just confusion. And so it impacts our ability to concentrate. Just think about it. Even with the pandemic, people were really stressed. That was hard. It impacted how we do life. If we had like an accident or some type of a death or something that changes our life, that impacts us, and that will shift even with our sustained attention. Or sometimes we may just be really tired. So our sustained attention isn't as, maybe we usually are there for 10 minutes, but it's 8 minutes because we're really tired. Or perhaps depending on what we ate or we didn't eat, we might have more lethargy, because the brain actually needs fuel. It needs water and it needs good foods that will help it run. And so depending on what we eat, that can impact us. Sometimes people say that foggy brain, not just COVID, but foggy or feeling tired. And I've even had times where if I'm super tired at night, like that's it, it's just too much. Or sometimes when we sustain attention so long and take no breaks, and we're super tired, super taxed, and our brain is like, it's time, I'm done. And so these are important things to consider. So when we're thinking about sustained attention, it is our ability to start and stop things, and how long does it take? And it really is focusing and keeping focused. Now, sometimes you can think about sustained attention. How many of you have ever tried to do the whole stare at the other person and see how long you can do that? That is sustained attention, but sometimes it might be interesting because you're thinking about something else, but your goal is, I want to see if I can outstare the other person. And that could be a fun game. That is a way that you might want to see if you could do sustained attention. Some solutions or ways to help with this is to first get a timer. See how long, if you focus on something, or if you listen to a song, do you hear it the whole time way through? When you're going to write, when you write, do you go anywhere else? Does your mind wander? Because that's your baseline. That's like, how am I on a task? And then what do I need to switch? And if it does switch really quickly, great, because that means that, yep, my sustained attention may need some different evolving. And no judgment, everybody has strong areas and areas of growth. So ways to help the sustained attention is if you can even try to do it with small little 10-second increments, maybe writing. And when you write, you're going to really focus and say, okay, this is what I'm writing. And this is my next part, and really see after like 30 seconds where you're at, and giving yourself that pause and then continue. And what you're doing is you're being mindful of what you're thinking about, which adds in our metacognition, my favorite word, thinking about your thinking. And so what you're doing is you're setting some new things to help your brain stay focused. Another thing is making sure you feel safe, and it really is regulating the brain. So drinking lots of water helps regulate our brain, so your brain feels safe, and it helps regulate your central nervous system so that you actually may have more sustained attention after that. Having that water, being in a more isolated place that's quieter if you need that, being mindful of any of the distractions that might distract you, like email or phones or all that stuff. So those are all important points to be mindful of. Finally, just really thinking about what is it that you want, because sometimes for sustained attention, it's for a paper, it's for doing something, not necessarily sports. Our sports will help us when we're active or we're moving. But when you're doing something more isolated, what is it that is your goal, and where are you at, and where do you want to go? So that's also another part, is identifying where am I at. Maybe I want 10 minutes of sustained attention. I'm at 2 minutes. So that's where you can use a timer. You can do some focused writing even for a minute and see how you're doing, and then check in with yourself and say, am I focused on this? Okay. And even that self-talk to help you keep on track. So those are some simple things. Obviously, there's other things that may be more complex. So if you are a survivor of traumas, there's counseling, there's support, there may be support groups depending on your trauma. And those will all be things that can wrap around to help you and support you in helping your sustained attention. So those are just a few little tips and tricks. I hope you have a great day. Certainly come join us. We're going to have some great new guests. I'm really excited. We'll have Suzanne Burns next week, and we'll have some other guests coming up. So make sure you tune in every Wednesday, and I'll be creating an event page to remind you that we're on. And so then you can watch either the recording or really there'll be a lot of the recordings. So we're recording ahead of time. And then I will put the recording in and the link in for you to watch every week. All right. Have a great night. Take care.